someone with 1.1 million different than someone with 9.9? Like, yeah, they're very different. 1.1 is closer to level 3 and more like someone in level 3, and someone with 9.9 is much more like someone in level 5. It's especially true for those in levels 4 who, like, you talk about people with RSUs and stuff. There's a lot of people that are working in these big tech companies that have a few $1,000,000 and they're doing well. But if you are trying to get to level 5 and beyond, that's a completely different strategy for a lot of these people.
I'm excited about today's Not Advice podcast. But before we get started, I figured I'd give you a quick update on tariff impact on avocados. We're going still into the seasonal highs of both California and Mexico avocado production. So prices continue to level off. But with additional research, it seems like there's a special exemption on top of the normal Mexico tariffs on agriculture from Mexico, except tomatoes. There's a weird carve out for tomatoes, but every other vegetable that meets specific USMCA guidelines in terms of country of origin isn't susceptible to the proposed tariffs on Mexico. Peru is still going to get hit. My only concern is that the Mexico Avocado Board has started amping up marketing and trying to get more diversification into who they're exporting to. And I saw them pitching Brazil pretty hard as a market for what they claim is the best avocados in the world. We'll see how that goes.
Okay, that's quite a claim. Again, I come from Southern California, and before we introduce our guest, who I believe is also from Southern California, I'll say that there's going to be some farmers from where I'm from who are displeased with that brag.
They're throwing down Avocados from Mexico board versus the Haas Avocado board. It's very, very competitive. So with that, should we go ahead and introduce our guest? I'm excited today. We have Nick Maggiulli joining us. He's the creator of the blog Of Dollars and Data, COO of Ritholtz Wealth Management, and now a 2-time New York Times bestselling author, most recently having written The Wealth Ladder, and really excited to be discussing that with him today. So with that, welcome, Nick, to the Not Advice podcast.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Nick. And before we jump in here, we'll just run through the disclaimer. So again, this is not financial advice specifically. Nothing here is meant to convey anything about your individual circumstances. Everything we're talking about here is general in nature. Seek a qualified professional. That could be investment, tax, or legal advice. That's not us here. This is all just general and hopefully a lot of fun. Nick, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So Nick, tell us a little bit about the Wealth Ladder. What are the levels? How do you think about progression across those levels? Or maybe starting with, what is wealth? How do you define that?
I think wealth is having the ability to live life on your own terms. And so wealth is a very broad definition in that sense, because that could mean social wealth, that could mean financial wealth. You need all of these things to live a good life, I would say. But in terms of the wealth ladder, the idea behind it is that your financial strategy may need to change over time. And so once you think through that, you'll realize that I came up with these like arbitrary levels. They are arbitrary, but they are very useful in the sense of saying, hey, maybe as I get from one level to another, I need to reassess my strategy, right? Or if I'm trying to get to a particular level, maybe the strategy I need to follow is very different. Those 6 levels, they're in terms of your net worth. So just take all of your assets minus all your liabilities. And this is household net worth in this case. It's less than $10,000 is level 1. Level 2 is $10,000 to $100,000. Level 3 is $100,000 to $1 million. Level 4 is $1 million to $10 million. Level 5 is $10 million to $100 million. And finally, level 6 is $100 million plus. I broke it up this way because the data in the United States actually is pretty good in terms of how the number of households are spread across the levels. So 20% are in level 1, that's less than 10,000. 20% are in level 2, that's 10,000 to 100,000. About 40% are in level 3, that's 100,000 to a million. And 18% are in level 4, that's 1 to 10 million. The top 2% is level 5 and above. So let's just say 10 million plus. It's only 2% of households. And in level 6 in particular, which is 100 million plus, there's only about like 10,000 households in there in the United States, 30,000 globally. So it's a very small, long tail there at the end. But I think the strategy to get out of level 1 to go to level 2 is different than the strategy to go from level 4 to level 5, et cetera. So you can just see how your spending decisions might change, your income decisions might change, your investment decisions might change as you move across the ladder over time. So that was the framework for all of this stuff. Yes, this stuff is arbitrary. I know Andre earlier, you said, well, is someone with 1.1 million different than someone with 9.9? Like, yeah, they're very different. 1.1 is closer to level 3 and is kind of more like someone in level 3, and someone with 9.9 is much more like someone in level 5, right? So it's not like the minute you have one more dollar, your life fundamentally changes. I just think the general frameworks need to start shifting as you move through the levels. Over the long term, as you move into this level, you need to start thinking about those things.
I love it. I think it was such a good way to position it. When you first launched, the posts were going viral, like screenshots of the book, of the levels. Were you surprised at all in the conversation around those levels?
In some ways, no. I'm not saying that because I'm a genius or anything, but because I wrote a blog post back in December 2019, and it was my most viral blog post ever, and it was called Climbing the Wealth Ladder. So I kind of did an initial pitch. It wasn't like oh, I really thought through it. There's a ton of flaws in the arguments I made, the initial arguments. There's a bunch of stuff that happened. But basically, I pitched this out there. It was on the front page of Hacker News for 8 hours. So it was up there, like it was getting a ton of views. It was getting, and not only that, but you can still find it. All the comments were in there. There were thousands of them. I went through every single comment in there and every single pushback and everything. I said, okay, I'm going to address as many of these as possible if I ever write a book on this. And so everything kind of aligned. I said, hey, I want to write on this. I addressed all those comments. I put them in all the chapters related to this, and then I expanded it far more than that. So it wasn't just that blog post. That blog post is great for the spending, but I didn't talk about income. I didn't talk about investments. I didn't talk about the mobility stuff, which I talk about in the book. So it is far more than a blog post. And I know some of the reviews I've seen says, oh, this could have been a blog post. Like, parts of this were a blog post, but there's a lot more here that I added that's way beyond all that stuff. I think that's the main thinking behind this.
I felt the same way. As I was reading through, I was like, oh, I've like writing my notes. I'm like, oh, this is my feedback on this. And immediately it would be addressed. It would be like, oh, like you pushed on like, this is a framework. In the future, these levels will change. Thinking about it overall, broadly, what the different levels enable versus getting too hung up on the specific numbers of those levels.
Yeah, I think there's a trade-off between precision and usefulness. Like I could have been like, actually, level 4 is 1.3 million to 8.4 million. And then level 5 is 8.5. Like, I could have done that, but then this framework's harder to memorize. It's harder to talk to other people about. The idea is less likely to spread. Like I end up getting precision, but then I lose everything else, which is like the most useful part of the framework, which is just like a general framework to think through wealth and like how your strategy is going to change. I think it's especially true for those in levels 4 who like, you talk about people with RSUs and stuff. There's a lot of people that are working in these big tech companies that have a few $million and they're doing well, but if you are trying to get to level 5 and beyond, that's a completely different strategy for a lot of these people.
There's something powerful about this order of magnitude type rationale. I see this order of magnitude pattern throughout the book. You've got the different stages of wealth, how you should allocate your resources personally, whether you're trying to achieve leverage in various ways. I wonder if you could talk about orders of magnitude as a thinking pattern here throughout the book.
The big takeaway here is for someone with nothing, $10,000 would change their life. They'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't feel so much stress. All these things have made me feel better. Once you have $1 million or a few $1 million, $10,000, if I gave you that check, you'd still be happy. You'd be like, oh, thank you. That's very nice of you. But what are you going to really change in your life? The answer is probably very little, if nothing. It's one of those things where the usefulness of money tapers off over time. And it's just, you need a bigger jump to get a bigger lifestyle change. And I think everyone understands this intrinsically. And I just kind of took that idea. I used a log 10 scale. You probably could have done a different type of scale. I didn't even use the word logarithm in the whole book because I'm not trying to throw words out there and just to sound smart or anything. I'm just trying to come up with a concept that's helpful for people.
The 0.01% rule, and I think there was like a 1% rule in there too, of just like putting together these frameworks and not like rules of thumb to think about it and conceptualize. Like, how did you come up with that 0.01% rule?
The 0.01% rule actually comes from Jay-Z. So there's a song, I'm not going to say the actual lyrics because he curses, but he says, what's 50 grand to someone like me? Can you please remind me? At the time, his net worth was almost $500 million. So 50 grand over 500 million is 0.01%, 1 basis point or 1/10,000th of his wealth. So if you just say, hey, my net worth is X, divide that number by 10,000 or multiply by 0.0001 in your calculator, right? That's 1 basis point. And that's the trivial amount. That's the same amount to Jay-Z. So whatever your number is, like if you have a net worth of $10,000, you could say, hey, what's $1 to someone like me? Please remind me. It's the same sort of thinking. And that just scales upward. So once you hit $1 million, the triviality number is $100, right? People get so focused on the minor details. Oh, can I afford this? Can I afford that? And I'm like, if it's below this amount, like once a day, you can do that and just not worry about it. Now, I'm not saying you should do that every day and just try and find things to spend money on. That's not my recommendation. I'm just saying if you do that, your wealth in theory would just stay flat because I'm assuming it's growing by 0.01% a day, which is about 3.7% a year if you do it over 365 days. So it's really like a 4% rule in disguise, right? And so I'm not saying people should spend down their wealth every day, but they probably could spend that every day and be fine.
Yeah, that was one thing I noticed. I was like, this ladders up pretty almost identically to it's 3.5% per year of spend. And I was like, oh, that's my extremely ridiculously conservative safe withdrawal rate target versus the standard FIRE 4%. And I was like, oh, this ladders up perfectly to that. I never thought about it in terms of a daily spend amount.
Of course, like your income matters. Of course, you have to have income to live off. It's always the marginal decision though. Like when everyone's like, can I afford this? It's not like there's not someone in level 1 in abject poverty like, oh, can I afford a Ferrari? Of course they know they can't afford a Ferrari, right? But like your marginal decision is like, okay, I'm in a restaurant. Can I afford to get this nicer thing? Oh, I'm going to go on a vacation. Can I afford to buy the nicer seat or upgrade to a nicer hotel? Like that's where this rule comes in handy. It's in that marginal decision where you're like, I'm not sure. And that's where I say, hey, you can use this rule for that.
So level 4, you defined as like travel freedom, like the $1 million to $10 million range. I'm curious, as you were writing the book and as you were going through the feedback, like at least for me, that one of the buckets that you've also seen like outside having the most like feedback towards and like questioning on?
I haven't seen as much on that one in particular. Travel freedom is you basically can travel where you want and when you want, but you can't travel how you want. I think flying private is a completely that's a level 5 phenomenon. Besides that, you can basically start to stay in almost any hotel by the end of level 4. You can and once again, the spending freedom starts at the beginning of that level, but by the end, you truly have full spending freedom. By the time you have 10 million bucks, you can spend $1,000 extra a day. So compare like a decent hotel to like the nicest hotel in an area. It's probably about that difference on a nightly basis, right? Of course, there's some hotels that are way more crazy than that, but in general, like that's kind of true, right? And so you're like, okay, that's the marginal decision, and so it's going to be somewhere in that range, and it depends kind of where you're traveling and how you're traveling, et cetera. But that's kind of the thinking behind it.
What would you encourage someone to think about in terms of like age versus level and how that kind of factors in?
So obviously time is correlated with building wealth because you've had more time to save money, invest, et cetera, right? So everyone knows that intrinsically. Age is one of these things. The median age of someone in level 4 is about 62 years old. So you're like, oh, it's just like old people in there. Well, not necessarily. That's some of it. But the other thing you have to think about, though, is all else equal, a 35-year-old with $1 million and a 65-year-old with $1 million, the 35-year-old is actually less financially secure. And you're saying, Nick, that doesn't even make sense. Like, they have more money relative to their peers. They should be better off. I said all else equal because that 35-year-old has to still work to get to 65. If they just start spending down their money then, they're not going to last till, let's say, 90, right? So they need to work to get to 65. Yes, they're in a better position relative to 35-year-olds, but the 65-year-old, technically, that $1 million, they can stop working and maybe just survive on that through the end of their life. If you really think about this in terms of a time thing, like, yes, you'd probably rather be the 35-year-old and have that $1 million because you're in a better spot where you have optionality. You can keep working for a few decades or you can maybe take a break at some point. Just thinking about the age alone is not telling you everything, right? And also, like, the market doesn't care about your age. Like if I go to buy a house and there's a bunch of older people that have more money than me, I'm like, but age adjusted, I should get a discount. Like, nope, they don't care. If I'm bidding for a house, it doesn't matter your age. So I'm not saying age isn't important. It is correlated here, which is why I talked about this in chapter 10, which is the mobility chapter. At the end of the day, money is money. And so if I'm trying to bid for a house against someone else, if they're older, it doesn't matter. I have to still have more money than them to win in this competition. So I think age matters, but I don't want people to focus on that too much because I think it pulls away from the other dynamics in the marketplace.
I was talking with my brother a couple of years ago, and he was like, who's going to write this book on how to become a centimillionaire? Like literally the steps that I should take. He was like, I would buy that book. And I was like, oh, it's 2025, a couple of years later. Do we have that book now, Nick? Do you have this blueprint in front of us that we can execute on?
It's not how to become a centimillionaire. It's like it's more of a small section of a book. It's not the entire book, because if I had to say, okay, how do you become a centimillionaire? Ignore that, like becoming an athlete or a celebrity entertainer. It's just the probability is too small. I mean, unless you have some like major strength there already that you can capitalize on, I would say, okay, if you're like at the 99th percentile of that already, maybe you test that out. Besides that, you have to like run a business, and you have to probably sell your first business, get into level 5, and then use that time, use those resources, energy, connections, etc., and then do it again and do it even bigger to get into level 6, right? And that's kind of what the data shows, at least. Of course, like, there's no guarantees with that. There's no surefire way to become a centimillionaire. There's obviously some luck involved, how the industries are changing. A lot of stuff's going to happen, but if you look at the data, that's what the data suggests most of these people did. They were usually in their 40s or older as entrepreneurs. They had money, they had experience, they had connections, and they used that to build generally a second business that actually made them most of their money. So most of the famous entrepreneurs were not like one and done. Like their first business was the one that hit it big. That's usually very rare.
So you talk about just achieving leverage in various different ways. There's stepping stones as you're kind of trying to ramp up orders of magnitude of wealth, but maybe talk about leverage as a means to moving across those ladder rungs.
This form of leverage comes from Naval, and the idea is, depending on the type of leverage you have, you can use that to basically keep earning money even when you don't have to work for it, right? So like, it's basically detangling your input from your output, right? And so right now, like, most of us earn money by going and working a job, right? Every hour we put in, we get paid. Of course, even if you have a salary, someone might get paid more for 1 hour than someone else, but it's fundamentally a function of your time, right? Once you start using leverage, you can decouple that. And so the one I know the best is content. I can put up a blog post in the morning. Let's say I posted this AM, and I can have web ads running on that. And so if people are going to my blog, I'm earning 2-3 cents per person every single time they land on that page. While that's happening, I could be doing something else productive. I could work a full-time job. I can do other things. If you start a business, you're using labor, right? You're using other people's time. You have to pay them for that, obviously. But in theory, they're going to create more value for you than you pay them. And so that delta is how you earn money. You can think of, like, the simplest example of this is a consulting firm, right? Like, I'm billing out your time at $300 an hour, but I'm not paying you $300 an hour. I might be paying you $100 an hour, right? And so, because I have to pay overhead, everything else, etc. And there's some, profit margin in there, maybe 20 to 20% of that. So maybe $60 an hour is my profit margin that I make off your labor. And so that's another one, right? We can go through all these and kind of talk about these different types of forms of leverage and how you can use them to really juice your income. Basically, every very, very successful, financially successful person has used one of these, right? In some way. The exceptions are like the celebrities, but even the celebrities that end up doing like business deals and stuff, they end up using labor or capital or something of that nature to really expand their wealth.
It's much harder to come up with exceptions to these points of leverage than it is to come up with examples. You talked about business interests as a means to progress across these different rungs. I wonder if you could talk about the wealth levels and business interests as you move up the ladder.
I'm not the person to tell you how to start a business that's going to sell for 100 million plus, right? So I think the thinking here is like, this is from the Survey of Consumer Finances, this is the Fed data 2022. And obviously people who are richer or wealthier have more money than those that are poorer, but it's not even that they have more money in a business, they have more money as a percentage of their total assets too. I think that's the big thing here. It's not like, oh, well, level 6 obviously has more money, so they're going to have a more valuable business. It's like, no, not only is that true, but they tend to have even more of their assets in that business as well, right? And so you see someone in level 6, in general, most centimillionaires have at least half their net worth in one, or I mean, it doesn't have to be one business. This could be multiple businesses, but for most of them, let's be honest, it's one business. Elon's one of the exceptions, as few businesses, but even still, I would say over half of his assets, it's probably like 90-something% are in Tesla, right? So if you really think about this, right, depending on how you value his businesses, for most of these people, it's going to be in one business of some sort. And so that obviously gets into concentration, which is why, what you put on LinkedIn about concentration and thinking about what causes these people to fall down the ladder. It's because they have half their net worth in one business. And if that business goes under, they can end up falling down a level or two. So it's just something to think about. And I obviously, like, concentration builds wealth, but it can also destroy it. So it's the big kind of thing you need to think through.
I'm curious on that point, because climbing the ladder is always fun, but I'm curious what the data was showing when you're going through the different levels of falling down the ladder, down levels, and like which levels are most susceptible to the drops.
And if you look at the data, so this is from chapter 10. This is the mobility chapter. And so on the left side there, on the rows, you have the starting wealth level. And then after 20 years along the columns, you have the ending wealth level. For example, 34% of households that start in level 1 are still in level 1 20 years later, right? 12% of households that start in level 2 will be in level 1 20 years later. And this is inflation adjusted wealth, et cetera, right? So we've done all that on the back end. But which one has the lowest, has the most likely to fall down a level? It's starting level 5 going to level 4, 54%, or starting level 4 going to level 3, that's 25%. Now, there are a bunch of different things that could cause this. One is overconcentration, and I don't have the reasons for why they fell. I just have their incomes and their wealth over time. I don't say, oh, well, why did you drop? I don't have that, unfortunately. But we could theorize about what this is. Like, first off, there's not too many level 5 households, so the data is a little sparse there. So I wouldn't be too focused on level 5 in particular. But if we had to think, okay, what could cause them to fall down the ladder? One is concentration. Another, divorce. If you take someone who's got 20 million bucks and now you get divorced, you divide by 2, now it's 10 million each, assuming you didn't have a prenup or any of this. And a lot of these people generally don't, because they start this business when they don't have a lot of money, and then it grows into something much more than they could ever have dreamed. And then it's like, now they have this big thing. And obviously to get to that level, sometimes you have to, maybe you don't spend as much time with your spouse as you should have, and that can cause other problems, right? So divorce is one of these things. Of course, some people spend the money down too. Like, just because you went from level 4 to level 3, that's not a bad thing. Maybe you are spending that money down. Generally, retirees don't spend down their portfolios if you just look at the data. So I don't think that's too much of it. I think there's investment decisions and other things that could cause this. Healthcare in the United States is one thing where you could have a massive expense that maybe you drop a wealth level. But those are the things I think about, is like, are you diversified? How's your family life? Because that type of divorce can be very destructive from a wealth perspective. And then thinking about like health, and do you have the right insurance and everything in case something were to happen? You're not going to see this massive hit in your net worth.
Yeah, there's definitely more. There's fun ways to go down. I think that's like the die with zero mentality of trying to spend down your net worth by the time you meet your demise. That wouldn't be the worst way to go out.
Yeah, that's such a good book. And the reviews on that are so brutal, like on Amazon and stuff. And it's just not, I don't think it's fair. I think because people are just, if something makes you feel uncomfortable and then you give it a bad review, like that doesn't actually say anything about the work itself, right? And so that's what's kind of interesting, because I think it's one of the best books ever written. I don't agree with, okay, die with zero, but I think it's directionally accurate. Die closer to zero. And I think if you look at the data, like most retirees, only I think it's 1 in 7 retirees are actually pulling down their principal of those that have a portfolio. Of the 6 out of 7 are either just spending their investment income, so whatever dividends they're throwing off, right? They're spending less than that, or they're spending up to it. So 6 out of 7 are spending their income or less. So there's a lot of retirees where they get their dividends, they don't even spend those. They can't even spend all that money. They end up reinvesting. Most people that take RMDs end up reinvesting that money. They don't end up spending all of it. And so that's a big wake-up call. Like, there's a lot of retirees and they're not really spending down their money. And so I think Die with Zero is a push in the right direction, right? Especially now with, like they say, the millennials and the Gen Z just have so much less wealth compared to where they were in prior generations for like the boomers at our age, et cetera. And I think this is a way for like that generation to give back and help the younger generation.
Yeah, no, definitely. I liked the message around, I think it was like time someone gets a inheritance is typically around 65, when it won't really impact their life that much at all.
Yeah. I've even asked people, it's so funny because I asked people this on Twitter. I said, would you rather have 100,000 at 30, you get 200,000 at 40, or you get, I think it's 400,000 at 50 or something. I'm doing like a basically 7% guaranteed return every year, right? Because if it doubles every 10 years, rule of 70, et cetera. Even with that, I said, okay, what would you rather pick? Every single person, or not every, but overwhelmingly people choose the 100,000 and 30, right? They said, I'd rather have it younger. But then I'm like, okay, would you give this to your kids? Oh no, I can't trust them. Like, what? Like, you want X, but your kids probably want X by that definition, since they're like most people. Yet you don't want to do that. And it's very interesting kind of cognitive dissonance going on.
And I remember in undergrad economics, the professor was talking about like the marginal utility at different ages, and your marginal utility of happiness, like early on, according to the academics, you should be taking money and borrowing money to live your life and optimize the happiness. Then later on, it's not when you're going to be having like the marginal advantage, because you're going to have accumulated wealth over time. And like, how do you smooth out your happiness and utility curve is like an interesting concept. And I think it's with relation to inheritance, it's like the one way I think that could be possible. Although I've tried giving this book out to my parents and in-laws and stuff like that, it just hasn't landed.
Yeah, I think consumption smoothing is a very interesting concept and great in theory, but I think it's hard to pull off.
Yep. For a while, Andre, we were talking about asking folks for micro consumption now. What are little things, little ways you can spend your money today to improve like your overall quality of life? So I think, Andre, you talked about buying like a fancier coffee machine. And I was saying, oh, I got a much fancier shaving razor because I'm a compulsive shaver. So what are other little things that people should be spending their money on? Better bed sheets, silly things like that would actually make your life better. What are other examples of that? And Nick, are people even talking about that kind of stuff with you?
So I think the things that really add value for me is just buying back time in some forms. Now I have in-unit laundry. When I was in New York City, I'm in Jersey City now, but when I was in New York City, like I was always like having to go into the basement where the laundry machine is, do all this and take all these hours. And there was a laundromat close by. I said, let me just take my stuff in there and just try this and have them do it. Right. And it was the biggest upgrade. And it's like one of those things where it's like, it saved me, just the folding of the clothes took like 30 minutes. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? I could start writing a blog post, whatever. So I started doing that. And for me, just like anything that frees up your time is generally a good thing, especially if you're like, you have other things you could be doing. Yeah, I'm a big fan of freeing up time. So whatever that means, it was completely worth it.
Yeah, I think that's something the FAANG audience where they have a lot of disposable income and most of that income is coming from their W-2 job. I always push people to think about what are the things that you could be spending money on to be able to sustain your income, because you might be getting paid a lot at these FAANG jobs, but there's a reason for it. It's a lot of work. They're putting in a lot of hours. It's like very demanding. They're not just giving you these high salaries just for fun. It's because you're literally have these sets of skills that not many people have, and they're making you work for every dollar of it. It's one of the things I think you hit really hard on in the book is around income being like the number one strongest relationship between wealth and all of these levels. Like nothing's more correlated than income. Anything that you can do to spend money on to sustain that income will just be so high ROI.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'll post that. There's a table I have in, I think, chapter 2, which shows like by income, I think it's quartile or whatever, the 4 groups. I show the wealth. So I say, here's the 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th percentile wealth based on like the 4 income groups. And it's clear that like the higher your income, the higher your wealth. And I will post stuff like this and I will get feedback on Twitter like, oh no, I know plenty of people with high income and no wealth. And I'm like, you're either just happen to know the craziest spenders ever, or you're lying, or you just you're pulling 1 or 2 examples and assuming that's the world. Because if you actually look at the data, no matter how you cut it, like income is correlated with wealth so much. Like 95% of households that make over 200K a year have a net worth over 200K. Now, of course, I'm not saying 200K is a lot of money, but to say, oh, I know a lot of people with high income and no wealth, I would say 200K is high income, right? And 200K is not no wealth. It's not a ton of wealth, but it's not no wealth. So I'm like, hey, even when I'm making this very specific thing, like you're talking about the 5% of people. If you want to base your arguments about around 5% of people, go ahead. I will make my arguments around the 95% because I'm like, that's where the data shows. I'm not saying there aren't anyone out there that spends a bunch of money. We probably all know someone that spends crazy even though they have a bunch of money, but that's not my argument. My argument is what is the most likely. It's like we think about base rates, right? What are the base rates, right? So the base rate for a lawyer is making X dollars per year. You can assume like if I get a law degree, I'll probably be like the typical lawyer, right? Oh, if I go to work at a FAANG company, I'm probably going to make this, right? Because this is what all these other people make, et cetera, right? For that role. And so I think we have to think in base rates more, and a lot of people don't do that. And so I'm just trying to show that with data and on income. And like, the more I see it, the more I just can't support this, oh, cut your spending to get rich. Like it just doesn't work. It's not a real thing in my opinion.
Level 4, the median income is right around that 200K mark. And then for level 5, it's like all of a sudden now 725K. Very strong correlations there. And I think that's one thing we've both shared on LinkedIn a number of times is kind of like the importance of income. I think everyone loves to talk about compound interest, and like compound interest is super fun, but early on, like compound interest isn't the biggest thing that matters. It's all around income and your physical ability to save money. Like how much money you could save is going to move the needle way more. Compound interest generally, even me. So I have a 15-year tech career, even within big tech, and looking at my overall portfolio now, it's still 70% of my overall net worth is from pure contributions.
Yeah, I do a running calculation of this as well, and it's roughly the same. I think it's 75% for me, but I think I only have a 13-year career, so maybe give me a year or two, and hopefully my investments pick up a little bit.
I haven't been working full time for the last 2 years, so it had a little bit of a stop on the pure accumulation side.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a big piece that people ignore, and obviously, like, it's true for at least probably the first 2 decades of your career. And then as you wait and the longer, let's say you're not working, like the longer you wait, the more it's going to be the investment gains, right? All assuming we live in a world that actually has positive beta, right? So if we don't go to another dark age, your investment gains are going to keep going up, right? Yeah, I think it's just something people overlook, and it's fine. Like, I get why, because there's so much, avocado toast is bad. Don't have your latte every day, and all to demonize poor people and say, oh, you're poor because of your spending. The data just shows that's not the case. There's obviously those people that are true because of their decision, that are poor because of their spending decisions, but that is once again in the minority of cases.
Yeah, we often talk about how it's not just your spending decisions, but also your investment decisions. And so maybe somebody is creating their portfolio or really optimizing on some tax strategy or whatever. But we're like, no, actually, your total wealth is, at least in its initial years, anchored to your income. That's what the ultimate driver is. And then so Andre and I were joking about this years ago now. It's just, look, all these people are really excited about some crazy ETF or some strategy. We're just like, no, you should actually just be trying to get promoted at work. Like, it's a completely different way of looking at how you should be accumulating wealth, at least in the early years. I think it changes dramatically as you move up the rungs. I'd like to hear about that next, probably.
Yeah, and I think that is the big shift, especially once you get into level 3. And by the time you get into level 4, your portfolio can start to compete with you. It really depends on your income, though. I think especially Andre, since you guys, you write about, FAANG stuff, like there are FAANG people out there making $500, $1 million, et cetera, a year because of stock options, et cetera. And so that is becoming more normalized because of that. It is really hard for you to get a $1 million return in a year on your portfolio. Like, even if you have a $10 million portfolio, you need a 10% return. So like, let's say you have a $2 million portfolio, which is great. Like, you need, a 50% return to match what you can do in a year. So it really depends. So it's like, you're in a race. So like, if your income keeps going up and up and up through your career, then like, yeah, your portfolio is not going to keep up for a long time. But if your income ever kind of plateaus or starts to come down, then it can really start to catch up and compete with you, right? So I think that's kind of the big thing, is where you start to like, income moves the needle until it stops moving the needle. And for every person is different. As you said, the median income on level 4 is about 200,000. So at what point is, so let's say that's $200,000 pre-tax. Let's say post-tax, we're looking at, I don't know, 150 to make it easy. Like, how much money do you need before like 150 is your portfolio is throwing off $150,000 and it's a few million bucks, right? Let's say it's conservatively, it's like, I don't know, $3 to $4 million, depending on your rate of return. So you would need a sizable portfolio to get there. But once you get there, now it's like, okay, if I'm only taking home 150 after tax, my portfolio is returning, let's say 200 after, now you're kind of, it's a very different game there.
Which brings up one of I ended my post on this main topic, which is like feeling stuck in level 4. And I thought you put it really well. I'm gonna read a quick quote. It's like, you said that this is why it's so easy to feel stuck in level 4. You can have a lucrative career and millions of dollars in net worth, but any financial progress you make is almost unnoticeable.
Yeah. And the math on this is very simple. So let's say you're saving $100K a year. It's a decent amount to save, right? $100,000 after tax is no joke, right? If you have $1 million portfolio, you're contributing to your wealth by 10% a year. So ignore your investment gains and everything, just 100K over $1 million, 10%, right? By the time you have a $5 million portfolio, it's 2%. It's very simple math here, guys. I'm not doing anything complex. It's like, you just can't move the needle in the same way. I think that's why, I use the Succession quote where he's like, 5 to 10's a nightmare, Greg. Like, you can't do anything. You're the world's, poorest millionaire or whatever it is. Like, so it's like, it's such an interesting idea. And I know it's like, first world problems, world's tiniest violin. I get all that. I get how privileged it sounds, but it's true. It's just, your motivation can change. And so if you are making $1 million a year, yeah, you can still really impact your wealth. But if you're making $200K a year and you have $5 million in portfolio, you're like, what? Like, this is, why am I even working? Maybe there's something else I could be doing that's more fulfilling for my life than this marginal bit of money. And I think people get there. And that's where my take is, like, CoastFire is what picks up. That's where CoastFire comes in. Hey, maybe you can take a lower paying job that you love and not have to worry about money and kind of just coast until you get to retirement.
There's kind of a shift that happens at some point. Like, this is going to go from portfolio returns and regular income into business interests. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, there's surely a shift in portfolio and income as you are starting to build into a business, or you're building into your second business. It seems like your net worth would start to get detached from your income as soon as your business interests ramp up. Just curious how you think about that.
It really depends on what you're trying to do. Like, if you are trying to get to level 5 or something and you're like, okay, well then I need to kind of go out and do something on my own, or maybe just join a startup early and hopefully this thing gets really big, or start my own company. I think that is how that happens, right? There are obviously people that got into level 5 that were like FAANG employees. Like, if you went to Facebook in 2013 or Meta in 2013, like, and you got a bunch of stock options like now because of the growth in the stock, like you definitely could be in level 5. And I know that I know Andre probably knows people where that happened. I mean, it's probably much more difficult to do that today, despite how well the stock's done. It's just tough to get like an award that size. So in terms of how that changes, it really is more kind of based on you and what you want to do, right? Because you're not going to get business interests without trying to go after them. You're not just going to wake up one day and, oh, I own this business. Like, nope, you got to go and either actively work at a place or start your own company or buy a lot of a stock and hope it goes up a lot. But those types of things are rare, right? At least the last case there. So that's kind of how I think about this stuff. It's like, that's really the only way into level 5. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, like you have to own a business that either becomes a very small part of a very, very large business or a large part of a decent sized business.
Relative to concentration, it seems like there's almost like a smile curve where like getting into level 4, maybe there's a lot of concentration, but then staying in level 4 requires diversification. But then getting to 5 and 6, all of a sudden, the majority of those people are pretty concentrated, maybe in businesses as opposed to what different concentrations that get you to like 3 and 4.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense though, because for the typical person to have like a decent amount of wealth and live a good life, you don't need to get into level 5 or 6. You can get into level 4 and diversify and be happy, right? I don't think any more money is required for happiness whatsoever. However, for someone that gets in level 5 or 6, they're now there to stay there to like really guarantee you have to diversify, right? And so this is why I've argued that I think Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are actually richer than Elon Musk. And you're saying, well, Nick, like according to the data, like Tesla's bigger and all this, so like he's the richest man in the world. I'm like, yes, but he's not diversified. Like all it takes is one, like I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if something happens to Tesla, most of his net worth would kind of crumble pretty quickly. Like Bill Gates, like he's like the largest private landowner in America. Like what takes out Bill Gates? The only thing I can think of is like a massive civilization ending type of event. You know what I'm saying? Because he diversified all his wealth. Same with Buffett. Like, you know, I know they're giving up their wealth and all that, and I'm not exactly sure with the foundation, all that, but you get my point. Like that wealth is generational for many generations, right? Compared to Musk, like who knows? Like maybe Musk is the future and his will be even bigger and none of that bad stuff will happen. But because he's so concentrated, it really does kind of change that a bit.
Is there any measurement here for some kind of, it's like concentration or risk adjusted net worth? Like I'm trying to think through, what does that even, what could that look like?
There isn't. This argument is still like, it's an issue for everybody. It's just most noticeable for people in like deep in level 6. But right now there's 18% of the United States is in level 4, 1 to 10 million, right? You know what the median net worth is among all those people? It's 2 million. So there's a lot, you know, half the people are below 2, the other half are 2 to 10, right? Because remember, it's very concentrated on one side. So when you know that, it's like, okay, if that's the case, like, how are all those people like less than 2 million? Like a lot of those people have home equity. And so the question is that wealth even real? Like if you went to sell all those houses right now, all those prices would drop pretty dramatically and all that equity, all that paper wealth would disappear. The same thing's true if Musk went to sell all of his Tesla shares, right? All of that value would disappear and it would, you know, all of his wealth wouldn't really be there. So there's a little bit of this obfuscation that's happening regardless of the level, right? But it just really, it's more concentrated at the top because it's just levered up so much, right? He has so many more shares. He has so much more of it. So what he decides to do with the shares impacts the price more than anything else.
And then one other concept that I really liked from the book was you were talking about how normally households, again, like you were talking about, even your laundry example is a good one. Like you lived in a place without laundry. You had to go physically go there. And then later on in your life, you had a in-unit laundry. And then maybe I want to buy back my time. I'm going to pay someone to do the laundry. There's like a clear progression going from one set of steps on the ladder to the other one and all of the discipline that goes to get you there. Now you have this like concept of like skipping levels. You were alluding to maybe like the business increase in value. You go through an IPO, but I see it too a lot within FAANG. Like all of a sudden your new hire grant has 3x since you joined, and now you just jumped over levels like 3 and 4, and all of a sudden you're on the steps of 5, but you've never learned those lessons and discipline that normally people go through to get to level 4, level 5. How do you think about the skipping level concept?
I don't have a lot of research on this. I'm just doing this just through pure logic. Remember, the median age in level 4 is 62, right? So it's like you don't know what it's like to spend, 3 decades, 4 decades of your life working, saving, investing, etc. So if you just got a bunch of money thrown on you, like what could happen? Where else do we see that happen? Oh, it happens with athletes, right? They have a 5-year career on average, right? They make a lot of money in that 5 years, much more than the cumulative lifetime earnings of a typical American or a typical, person in the United States. But that gets thrown on them quickly. They have all this money. They start spending quickly. If their lifestyle doesn't match up with that, right, with their realizing that, hey, my money is probably going to basically drop off by 90-something% in about 5 years, they can get into financial trouble. And so we hear about those things, all these athletes going bankrupt, et cetera. I think it's getting better. I don't think they are as bad with that because now there's a lot more information out there. People are being smart about this type of stuff. But that's the similar thing. Same with the lottery winner, same type of thing. I think lottery is a little more extreme because usually it's like we're talking 20 plus million, and a lot of times it's over $100 million. So it's really night and day. But I think if you're not trained for that, you can definitely make mistakes there.
Yeah, and I think like the lottery and sport example is like an extreme one too, because they have no ability to ever earn those same levels of income again versus maybe like the tech side. Like maybe you can't get the same magnitude, but you're not going to go to unemployable ideally. Who knows what happens in the future, but it's still maybe not as high you're not going to have another IPO maybe, but you're still going to hopefully be able to have some level of income to sustain you a little bit more.
Yeah, even if you become like a sports commentator, like they get paid well. And some of the top ones get paid really well, right? But they're probably not going to, I don't think they get paid as well as an athlete who's like really in their prime at a big team or something like that. And maybe it's comparable in some cases, but if you're like a minor sports commentator trying to break in, you're not going to get paid anywhere near what you used to get paid.
So you're going to get paid nothing for 20 years. You're a sports commentator. So talking about happiness, Nick, would you mind just talking about happiness?
I basically am talking about how different things are amplified throughout the wealth ladder. And I basically say that as you gain more wealth, money solves fewer and fewer of your problems. And so money is very important, obviously, for level 1, level 2, right? But as you get into level 3, level 4, it just becomes less and less important because it can't solve your problems. For someone in level 1, most of their problems are likely money problems, right? But by the time you're in level 4, level 5, et cetera, most of your problems are things that can't be solved with money, right? Which is actually kind of ironic. Like you did all this stuff to work and get all this wealth, and that's great for a lot of reasons, but it's not going to solve your health issue, like necessarily. You can't just, write your cardiovascular system a check. You can't buy a new cardiovascular system, right? If you have an issue with your spouse or your kids or something, once again, you can't write them a check. Oh, just love me, or just, hey, I'm sorry I missed all your recitals for the last 5 years. Here's a check. Like, can we all be friends now? Like, it doesn't work that way, right? How I tried to make the book useful for people in levels 5 and level 6, because I'm not there to tell them how to gain more wealth or anything like that, is like the big thing I think they're overlooking is all the non-financial parts of their life. And I really believe they're doing it. Most people in level 5 and 6 are not spending enough time on their health. They're probably not spending enough time on their relationships. They're not probably freeing up their time more if they need to. They're probably overworked. They don't spend. So all of the things that matter in life, they're not looking at that just to chase the one thing that they really care about, which is money. And don't get me wrong, money matters. Of course it does. But at some point you have to be like, okay, maybe this isn't really the path I should have taken.
Yeah. And that's one that I resonate with a lot on the health side. And it's easy. I think a lot of people I talk to say like, oh, once I fire or take a sabbatical, I'll then worry about my health because I'll finally have time to do that. But I find myself in a situation where like, oh, okay, now I have time. And then now I'm going to go fishing a couple of times a day. And all of a sudden I hurt my shoulder because I hadn't been putting in the time to make my body more bulletproof on it. And now using more of that time on playing catch up versus investing in the non-financial aspects that will drive like lifetime happiness and like your health and all those pieces that you touched on that kind of mirrored maybe Sahil Bloom's 5 types of wealth.
Yeah. Because I collaborated with him on that in the financial wealth piece. So I said, I'm going to just use this framework in my book. So it's kind of, jersey swap, so to speak, right? But yeah, I think that's the thing that happens is people just overlook that. And once again, all these things compound, like your relationships compound, like your health compounds if you take care of it, right? And so you think about that, and then that is why like waiting isn't necessarily the right choice. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you're like, hey, I just need to work really hard for that first year coming out of school, that first. I get that. I'm not saying never to do it and not to, but there are times for it, and there are times when you have to realize like, hey, I need to really take care of this. So for me right now, the thing I think about more than anything is my health. Like I spend more time on that than I have anytime in my 20s, right? Because in my 20s, I could have, go out, day drink, party, whatever, and I would still be okay. Now as I'm getting into my 30s, I can see that can start to catch up with you. So I have to really kind of tighten it up on the health front. So if I do have one of those days, it's not setting me back like it would have before. So I think that's just the thinking there.
Yeah, everyone's going deep on the Brian Johnson longevity spending pieces.
Yeah.
Nick, you've got a good quote from Jensen Huang here about exactly like work-life allocation and whether he would even build NVIDIA again. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so he was interviewed and he said, I'll just read the quote because I think it's the words speak for themselves, right? So he was asked if he was 30 years old again, he would start his company, what would he do? And he said, I wouldn't do it. The reason why I wouldn't do it, and it goes back to why it's so hard, is building a company and building NVIDIA turned out to have been a million times harder than I expected it to be. Now, this is coming from a successful entrepreneur. This is coming from someone who, I mean, at the time, NVIDIA wasn't the most valuable company in the world. It was up there. It was like very, he was doing very well. This is post ChatGPT. So this was semi-recently, but if this is what a successful entrepreneur says, imagine all the failed entrepreneurs, what they would say, right? It's easy to be, oh yeah, just business interest and get rich. And it's like, there's a ton of work. There's a ton of stress. There's a lot of stuff. You're responsible for other people's lives. If you're a solopreneur, that's a very different thing because it's just you. But then even then, like, you're kind of responsible for your own destiny. And there is that pressure and the less of the security with having a job or something like that. So it is something to consider. I try to show all sides of the argument so people can make a good decision, right? I'm not here to say, okay, I know this is exactly what you need to do. I like to let the data and the anecdotes speak for themselves instead of me just trying to be like, oh, I'm confident. I know this is going to work, like blah, blah, blah. Like, what does the data actually show? And then you can make the decision for yourself.
One area that I think you didn't go as deep on in the book that I was curious on was that relationship piece. Because for me personally, one of the biggest unlocks for me financially was having a partner that was also working, that was also aligned with me on financial goals. And I'm curious if you were seeing that too, because in all these numbers you have in the book are all household income and household wealth levels. So I'm curious what you saw in terms of the data, if it was available, like the impact of like being married, having a spouse, having a partner towards the different levels.
So I actually didn't look into that. I definitely could. It's on the data. There is a married flag, like a dummy variable. I could just throw it, it's in there. I can run that. I didn't look at it, but yeah, I would bet, of course, like if you have one income earner versus two income earners, all else equal, the two income earners are they're going to outcompete you, right? And so, of course, all those things matter, and having that is such an asset in so many ways. Not even just for like, okay, like yes, they could be earning income, but like let's say they're not even earning income. Let's say you have a spouse and that person stay at home. That person could be providing childcare, all these different things. One way or another, there's labor involved of some sort that's helping you. And whether there's so many entrepreneurs, successful people, where it's like, oh, like, how did you do this? You have 3 kids and this and that. It's like, oh yeah, like your spouse is the one that did all this work in the background and you're getting this like great entrepreneur award, all this. But it's like you had basically this person that was there for you. And if they hadn't been there, maybe you wouldn't have turned out this way. So I do think a lot of this is pair bonding. Groups like this can really change the game in terms of having a team, or having just even one more person is really enough to really help. And I've just seen this like personally, like I just got married in June. And so it, just even from that, us being aligned and like, hey, here are the goals. Like we got married in June and like, why didn't we go on our honeymoon right away? Because I had a book launch coming up, like, a few months, basically a month later, and we pushed it off. So we're going next week. So I'm actually leaving tomorrow night. So very excited for that. But it's one of those things where we agreed as a couple to kind of really work on this as a goal. And so we're kind of pushing this out and doing pods and all this stuff. And we're very happy we did it, but it's one of those things that we had to really discuss.
2-player mode is a game changer in terms of wealth, particularly if you guys are playing the same game. If you're playing different games, It could be catastrophic.
Oh, yes, I agree. My wife is more frugal than I am. She doesn't like, I'm not going to say she doesn't like the 0.01% rule. She just doesn't even listen to it. She's like, no, that's too expensive. I'm like, hey, it's $20. Who cares? Like, she's like, but it shouldn't be $20 for that thing. I'm like, oh gosh. So I'm much more relaxed about this stuff, but hey, so I have to listen to my wife.
Did you become more relaxed as your like wealth increased? Is that what you found?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, at least not initially. I think as it took me years to learn this and like realize like, okay, yeah, I could have done that. Even we talked about consumption smoothing earlier. When I was 23, I was at Outside Lands, the SF Music Festival or whatever. And like a beer was like $9 back. I don't know what it is now. It's probably like $15 or $18 now, but it was like $9. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm like, I'm just going to sneak stuff in instead. So I brought in these little tiny liquor bottles. I'm drinking these little mini balls. And I'm like, I didn't need to do that. I could have spent the $9. I would have been fine. I know I didn't have a lot of money then, but like knowing now, I could have been like, yeah, I could have been more relaxed. But like at the time, you don't know like, oh, things are going to be okay. Right. And so I think in your head, you just think like, oh, I got to do this or that. And so it's funny, but like, yeah, I probably could have been a lot more relaxed. And as you build wealth, you're like, okay, yeah, I was a little crazy there, but maybe that's necessary because I obviously have survivorship bias in that sense because I'm like, oh, I saying that now, but if I didn't have enough money in something, I'd had some sense of, some bad luck that had happened, maybe I wouldn't have made it here. So you have to also think about that side of it as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance of like the frugality mindset that you need to shed away, but maybe that's or the scarcity mindset, what maybe is a common characteristic. It's like among like immigrant families or first generation wealth families. And maybe that needs to not be entirely thrown out because that kind of discipline is super valuable. And maybe that goes to the point of skipping levels. And that's actually an interesting point from generational wealth transfer, because that's potentially a way also to have your kids skip levels. And maybe that's the detriment that comes out. They don't go through the different levels and experience those different levels in the same way that you did. And maybe that's where like the trust fund kid mindset can come from.
Yeah, of course. That really does change a lot of stuff. And I try to talk about this a little bit in the book, but that once again, you have to just try your best and communicate and create a sense of shared values. But at the end of the day, your children are going to do what they want to do. And so that's all. You can just hope for the best.
Awesome. I think we're coming up on time. Again, Nick, we really appreciate having you on. Everyone, go check out The Wealth Ladder on Amazon and your favorite local bookstore. It's all over the place. I highly recommend it. One of my favorite reads of the year. Anything else you wanted to plug, Nick?
No, but if you want to follow me, I'm at ofdollarsandData.com. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn, Nick Maggiulli, Instagram, Nick Maggiulli, or Twitter X at $and And I answer every DM. So as long as it's not absolutely unhinged, I will answer DM.
There's one other place to find Nick, and I had the pleasure of going into his GitHub over the last week or so. He's a regular committer. Hey, we have a technical audience, not just on the wealth side, but also on the FAANG side. And so folks, get into all those R files that he's got in there, run them, fact check him.
Yeah. I love it. Every single post that you have has a Git repository on the data side. Is that right?
If there is data that I actually built, yes. A lot of my posts don't have it, but for anyone that has a chart, like yes, I have all the code. Everything's open source. Both my books, every chart in there is completely open source. You can download the data, everything, and kind of do it yourself. So I've been like that since the beginning. I've wanted to help people. I'm not trying to lock stuff up. I've been very open about that stuff. So thank you.
No, I love it. Thanks again. We really appreciate you having you on.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.